One of the most anticipated movies for the rest of the year is hitting theaters and on Peacock tomorrow, and I got the chance to see this movie early, and I gotta say that this might be one of the worst movies I have seen so far this year. Let's get to the review. Welcome back, film fans. It is Brad from Let's Be Real Brad, and today in the channel, I want to talk to you guys about the brand new supernatural horror film called Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's is based on the popular video game series of the same name that is created by Scott Cawthon, and the film is directed by Tammi. So going into Five Nights at Freddy's, I was not a fan of the original video game series, as I had never played those games before, and I've only known them by the high schoolers that I work with. And so when I did my research after the movie, it made me appreciate how well those games really are, because this movie is just not it. If you're looking for this movie to just satisfy your referential or nostalgic needs for you to point at the screen and be like, oh yeah, I remember that when I played it in this video game, then that's really all you're gonna get from this film. Because from somebody who doesn't really know anything about the lore or the characters or really all that much about Five Nights at Freddy's, and going into it blind as I possibly can be and just trying to watch this as a movie, I just thought this movie was just straight up terrible. So let's just dive right into my negatives first, and I do have to start with the runtime. This movie clocks in around an hour and 50 minutes, and I thought this was one of the longest movies I have seen this year. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this movie is really boring, because so much of this movie just feels like padded filler to make this movie interesting, but it's just not, especially when Universal and Blumhouse have already planned a trilogy out of these movies. So it really does take so much of the tension and stakes out of this movie when you know nothing that bad is really all gonna happen. The pacing of this movie just drags the entire time, especially when the horror in this movie just doesn't do it for me. And when I started playing the original game on my phone after I watched the film last night at like 11 p.m. at night in the dark, I actually thought it was pretty creepy and I felt on edge. And that game came out in 2014. And, you know, when you have a movie like this, that really shouldn't happen. And that is probably one of the worst aspects about this film, is the horror. Now, I'm not expecting it to be one of the scariest movies of all time. I mean, it's a Blumhouse movie. You know, you're only gonna get so much. These are very accessible movies that people enjoy. I get it. I've seen a lot of Blumhouse movies. I think too many Blumhouse movies. But when this movie just feels like it's targeting like fifth graders, sixth graders, and not people who have been with this franchise, or just as a respectable PG-13 horror film, I do kind of feel like this movie was really lazy in that aspect. And I found all the kills in this movie to be completely disposable. Most, if not almost all of them, are off screen, and they're just not terrifying. And a lot of this has to do with the direction from Tammi, who I don't really know much of her work, as she is a newcomer to the film industry. She's directed a couple of other indie films before, so she doesn't have a big resume behind her, and I have no idea if how much control she even had over this movie. But the direction here is not great, and I get it. It's like Five Nights at Freddy's movie, but when a Willy's Wonderland movie that is straight up a knockoff of Five Nights at Freddy's is more visually and just interesting from a plot standpoint, and there's barely any dialogue in that movie, I think it just goes to show how bad this movie really is. Now let's talk about the performances here, as Josh Hutcherson, who you may know from The Hunger Games, Bridge of Terabithia, and other really good movies, stars in this film, and I thought he was really miscast here. But there are plenty of scenes in this movie where his acting is just from minimum to completely over the top, and it just doesn't work. It just feels like he's phoning in a performance. Matthew Lillard also stars in this movie, and he is easily the best aspect about it, even though he really isn't in this movie like at all. but I found it to be really nice and charming to have him in a movie because, you know, it's Matthew Lillard. This guy's a legend, and he clearly understood the assignment of the character he was playing, and I thought he did a really great job in the small role he had. Now, let's get back to the writing, as this is one of the dumbest screenplays of the entire year that also features what I feel is the worst subplot of the whole year, and maybe even last year as well, that involves this aunt character that is just so ridiculous and over the top that the movie takes itself so seriously with it. It was just so ridiculous, more ridiculous than animatronics coming to life and killing people. Like, that's how bad this subplot was. One of the things that I really hated about this film was the character of Mike, as I found him to be such an unlikable character, and not in a way that he is a complex and well-written character that, you know, you think is interesting, but you know he's a bad character, you know, like the likes of Walter White, Tony Soprano, the list goes on. And I know I'm comparing it to some of the best characters in television history, but when you have a character that you sort of feel bad for because of the situation that he's in and the trauma that he had, but he is so unlikable the entire runtime that his arc is never finished. It's just, he is exactly the same way that he starts up and how he ends in the film. This movie also has a ton of very cringe moments in here that fans of the series are just not gonna like, and I know this because when I went to the screening, there were general audience members that get to attend these screenings, and one person that was sitting a couple of rows ahead of me was literally pegging off the screen as a certain moment happened and was just basically saying, "What is this movie?" And I was dying of laughter, and I'm sorry, I couldn't help it because I didn't really understand why. I mean, the scene itself is just bad, but for a Five Nights at Freddy's fan, it was even worse. And that honestly was really hilarious. And I actually feel really sorry for him because he seemed like he was really into this movie. Surprisingly, I do have a few positives with this film, and I do have to start with the animatronics themselves, as they are the biggest selling point of this film. If they don't work, then this movie probably doesn't work, especially from a marketing standpoint, and I found them to be insanely impressive, as I didn't even know if they were a mix of puppeteering or actual animatronics or CGI, but however they did it, I found it to be very impressive, and I actually believed that they were alive at every single point in the film, and they look and feel like the characters from the video game, which is the selling point. So in terms of that, I thought it was really cool, and you do get a lot of them as the movie goes along, and so from that standpoint, I did really enjoy it. I also really enjoy the pizzeria place that they're from. I found it to look exactly like the game, and there was a lot of effort that went into it, especially with the stylistic choices from going back to like that 80s, you know, Chuck E. Cheese type look. And that was easily like the best parts of the movie in terms of trying to recreate what the fans enjoy from a reference and nostalgic standpoint. And there's a couple of other creepy characters that show up in this movie that the fans went crazy over. That's what worked about this movie, and if that's what you're looking for, you're gonna have a great time. Overall, guys, Five Nights at Freddy's is a trash Blumhouse horror film that is just made for the younger fans to go watch this movie, and it feels more of a algorithm AI dumpster fire of a movie than somebody that's trying to make a Five Nights at Freddy's movie, unfortunately. And it's also really unfortunate when you have the creator of the video game series, Scott Kaufman, to be a co-producer, co-writer, and a co-story writer of the film, and it still doesn't come together. I am giving Five Nights at Freddy's a 4 out of 10. Thank you guys so much for checking out this video. As I want to know below in the comments section, have you guys seen Five Nights at Freddy's, and are you planning on seeing it? Let me know all of your thoughts. Before you guys check out this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, leave a like as you always should, and ring that notification bell so I never get to miss you in a brand new video.